It is my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Perri Lee Roberts. Dr. Roberts is Professor Emerita of Art History at the University of Miami in Coral Gables, Florida. She's been a great friend to the Georgia Museum of Art over the years, and she's been guest curator and catalog author for numerous exhibitions on a range of topics over the years, including in 2002, Sacred Treasures, Early Italian Paintings from Southern Collections, The Material of Culture, Renaissance Metals and Textiles from the Ulrich A. Mitteldorf Collection in 2013 and 14, Modern Living, Gio Ponti and the 20th Century Aesthetics of Design in 2017, and Storytelling in Renaissance Maiolica in 2019-20. Dr. Roberts is also the author of the 3-volume Corpus of Early Italian Paintings in North American Public Collections, The South, which was published by the museum in 2009. And she was a contributor to the museum's Crest project, celebrating 50 years of the Georgia Museum of Art's Crest collection in 2013. Our curator of decorative arts, Dale Couch, had this to say about Perri Lee. What I admire about Perri Lee is her ability to take art historical method outside her specialty and apply it with aplomb to varying topics, whether it's Renaissance fabrics, Italian design, or Japanese ceramics. She is truly a Renaissance person in every sense of the word. And I wholeheartedly agree. We're very lucky to count her as a friend and colleague at the Georgia Museum of Art. So today she's going to be speaking about the exhibition Contemporary Japanese Ceramics from the Horvitz Collection, which is on view here at the museum through September 26, 2021. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Perri Lee.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you all for joining me on this tour of the exhibition of contemporary Japanese ceramics from the Horvitz Collection. This is the first time I'm doing a Zoom tour, so bear with me. It's kind of a strange situation to talk to a screen. Before I begin the tour, I want to thank a few friends at the Georgia Museum of Art. I'm very grateful to my dear pal and buddy, Dr. William Island, director of the museum, for asking me to curate this show and going outside of my usual area of expertise. I also want to thank Dr. Callan Steinman, curator of education, for inviting me to deliver this talk and providing important technical support. And Dale Couch, thank you for that tribute. As always, he provided gracious support as I ventured into a new area of decorative art. And last but not least, I'm very grateful to Michael Lakowski for supplying the many splendid photos you're about to see in the presentation. I'd also like to acknowledge the generosity of Carol and Jeffrey Horvitz for lending the 15 works on display. As collectors of Japanese ceramics for the past 13 years, they've assembled over 300 pieces by 800 pieces by 300 contemporary Japanese ceramic artists. It's the largest such collection outside of Japan. The Horvitzes have been extremely generous in recent years to lending works from their collection to museums across the country, and in particular to academic museums, which I think is so vitally important. They've lent to my home institution, the Lowe Art Museum, the Harn Museum at the University of Florida, and the Ackland Museum at the University of North Carolina. So without further ado, let's get started. You can go back one if you don't mind. There we go. As we take a virtual walk around the gallery, I want to begin by giving you a brief history, and I do mean brief, of Japanese ceramics. Then I'll talk about how ceramics are made and the many variables that ceramic artists take into consideration as they create their pottery. And finally, we'll look at each of the individual pieces in the exhibition. Japan has had an exceptionally long and successful history of ceramic production, dating as far back as 10,000 BCE. It boasts one of the oldest continual ceramic traditions in the world, thanks to the island's plentiful clay deposits and forests. From the beginning, Japanese culture regarded ceramics as products of skilled artisans and craftsmen. In ancient Japan, pottery vessels were made to be used primarily for ritual purposes. However, beginning in the 14th century CE, Japanese craftsmen began to make vessels for domestic use, including tea bowls, sake cups, plates, and jars. This ceramic tradition of practical utilitarian pottery continued well into the 20th century and still continues today. In the years immediately following the end of World War II, an avant-garde group of artists known as Sodesha challenged these ancient traditions by advocating the creation of sculptural ceramic objects. Their vision of art for art's sake came to dominate the production of art pottery in Japan in the second half of the 20th century. Although the work of this group was not particularly well known outside of Japan until the 1980s. Today, the country boasts one of the most, if not the most, robust contemporary ceramic scenes in the world. The exhibition incorporates 15 pieces representing 3 generations of master ceramic artists, dating from the second half of the 20th century to the present day. Now, regrettably, there are no examples in the show by any contemporary Japanese female ceramicists, of which there are a great many, and they're very talented. Made with both ancient and modern materials and techniques, the works are exceptionally diverse. However, they all share the superb qualities of outstanding craftsmanship and sophisticated design characteristic of Japanese contemporary ceramics. And as we'll see, many of the artists whose works are in the exhibition explore the physical properties of clay as a material. But before looking at individual pieces, I want to talk briefly about the process of producing ceramic artwork. The word ceramic actually comes from the Greek word meaning pottery. Traditional ceramics are made from clay. You can stop the slide right there. Traditional ceramics are made from clay, which is a fine-grained, firm, earthy material. We're probably all familiar with it, that is malleable when wet and hardens when heated. There are 3 basic types of clay vessels: earthenware, stoneware, and porcelain. Earthenware is the oldest material used in pottery. The clay is fired at relatively low temperature, producing a slightly porous, coarse product. And to offset its porosity, the fired object is often glazed and then fired a second time. Stoneware clay is fired at a high temperature until it becomes glass-like. Its surfaces are in general non-porous, fairly sturdy, durable, and at least in theory, chip resistant. In this case, glazing is used primarily for decorative purposes. Almost all the pieces in the exhibition are made with, or were made with, stoneware clay. Porcelain, the 3rd type of clay, is a very hard translucent ceramic made from kaolin clay with a bit of silica glass. It's referred to as white clay, or more often as China clay, because the techniques of working with it originated in China. It is fired at a very high temperature. Decorative glazing is applied, and then the piece is refired. I've purposely over-enlarged these images, which is why they look a bit grainy, to emphasize the ceramic artist's physical interaction with the clay. On the left is a pot thrown on the wheel, one of the most traditional and ancient of shaping techniques. On the right is an example, which many of you will probably recognize from camp or art classes, as hand building, employing coils of clay to build the vessel. As we'll soon see in the works in the exhibition, contemporary Japanese artists use these techniques, but they also shape their clay in a great variety of ways. Not only do ceramic artists use their hands to create the basic form, but also a myriad of tools, such as you see here, to enhance the surfaces of the vessel. To be honest with you, I am not a practicing ceramicist, so I can't tell you exactly what all these tools do, but this comes from a site of a website of a ceramic artist. So they're all useful, apparently. We can go to the next slide. There we go. Here on the left, for example, the artist is using a needle tool to cut deeply into the walls of the pot to create an all-over decorative pattern. And on the right, the ceramicist, after first shaping the vessel on the wheel, is shaving the surface with a trimming tool. Keep that image on the right in your mind, because we're going to be seeing a pot in the exhibition that was shaped very much in that fashion. Now, I've already used several times the term glazing. Some of you are probably already well familiar with that, but basically glaze is a viscous mixture of powder materials, including silica, that when applied to the surface of the clay, when fired, results in a glass-like finish. There are all types of glazes. There are all-over glazes. There are overglazes applied on top of underglazes. There are dripped glazes, runny glazes, and glazing created by the process of firing. And as you see here on the right, glazes can come in a wide variety of colors. Most of the colors that you see here are more modern pigments that have been developed in the 20th century and 21st century. The glazing of the surfaces of the ceramic vessel, together with its shaping, contributes to the aesthetic qualities of the finished product. An essential part of the ceramic process is heating the clay in a kiln, what is commonly called firing. All clays and glazes are created to mature at specific temperatures and for specific lengths of time. Porcelain requires the highest temperature at approximately 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, stoneware at 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit, and earthenware at approximately 1,900 degrees Fahrenheit. Today, most modern ceramicists use electric or glass-fired kilns, such as you see to the left and the right, respectively. I know at my home institution, we use electric kilns that you see on the left. However, many contemporary Japanese ceramicists still utilize the labor-intensive method of wood firing. The tunnel or cave kiln is the oldest form of wood-burning kilns, introduced into Japan from China via Korea in the 5th century CE. It consists of a firing chamber with a firebox at one end and a flue at the other. The single chamber is built into a sloping tunnel shape, as you can see, I think, very clearly from the diagram on the right. Fueled with firewood, and I should mention a lot of firewood, which is why the fact that Japan has so many forests was important in fueling the production of ceramics. These types of kilns require constant stoking around the clock, and the firing process can take days and days for the ceramics to be cured. They require constant stoking, since the wood that's thrown into the hot kiln is consumed very rapidly. Burning wood produces heat of up to 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, as well as the byproducts of ash and volatile salts, which settles on pieces during the course of firing. This results in a natural ash glaze, which may show great variation in color, texture, and thickness. And we'll be seeing examples of works in the show where this ash glaze is present. Now, I hope this brief overview of how ceramics are made have given you some insight into the many variables that go into the intensive, creative, and physical processes of producing a work of ceramic art. The ceramic artist has many choices to make: what clay to employ, the shape of the pot, how the surfaces will look, what glazes to use, how to gear the firing based on the materials employed, and of course, the intended aesthetic effects. As you'll shortly see as we examine the pieces in the exhibition, contemporary Japanese ceramicists are extremely attentive and sensitive to the intrinsic materiality of their medium. Many of them welcome the uncontrollable aspects of the ceramic process, and they embrace asymmetries and imperfections. By bringing life to clay and glaze through forming and firing, these artists liken their creative process, rather in creative endeavors, to the elemental processes of nature. Now, finally, we'll get to the wonderful works on display in the exhibition. And just as a point of information, Japanese names are written with the family or surname first. You might not be surprised to learn that I am not a Japanese speaker, so I apologize for my poor pronunciation of Japanese names and words. I don't mean to offend anybody. But to proceed, KAMODA was one of the most influential artist potters of post-World War II Japan. He employed the traditional techniques of stoneware fired in a wood-burning tunnel kiln, that kiln that we saw just a few seconds ago. This particular style of ceramic was popular in East Asia from the 5th through the 10th centuries CE, and was initially used for funerary and ritual objects. KAMODA's mastery of the pottery wheel is evident in this small jar. It's only some 8 inches wide and 7 inches tall. The striations in the clay clearly reveals the handiwork of the artist and serves to emphasize the roundness of the vessel. The fluidity of the green glazing around the neck of the pot is in marked contrast with the purity of the geometric form. This green glazing is the result of the wood firing, which causes an ash to form on the surfaces. In other words, the artist relied on the firing process to create the random decorative glaze patterning. Now, in this photo, the jar might look a bit dull and commonplace, nothing special. However, when you see it up close, as it's supposed to be seen, the richness of the texture, color, and sheen of the glaze becomes apparent. What looks like an ordinary jar is a unique, precious art object. Representing the 3rd generation of a distinguished family of contemporary Japanese ceramicists, KAWASE is considered one of the premier masters of the classic Chinese technique of celadon. Celadon pottery is made with either stoneware or porcelain clay, which is treated with a glaze or slip that incorporates small amounts of iron oxide. As the vessel is fired gradually in a special reduction process, the surface takes on a glass-like appearance, which is green, gray-green, or light blue in color, as you see here. I think you can see all of those tones in that small vessel. It's a very demanding technical process that requires a great deal of expertise to accomplish. In this instance, KAWASE has shaped the shallow sake cup on the wheel. The distinctive feature of the work is his masterful overglazing, consisting of the wine-colored veil-like shapes that float on the surface of the bowl. KAWASE is known for being inspired by nature's flora and fauna. And looking now at the interior of the cup, I think we can change the slide. There we go. Looking now at the interior of the cup, the decoration brings to my mind an image of flower petals floating on the water. The high gloss of the surface adds a quality of preciousness to this small object, which is only 2 inches tall and 8 inches in diameter. That's one of the drawbacks of seeing things on a screen. It distorts our perception of scale. One of the leading ceramicists currently working in Japan, TSUJIMURA is a self-taught artist who has mastered the traditions of Japanese and East Asian pottery techniques and processes. He lives in a mountainous region of Japan where he makes his own clay for stoneware and is known to bury his work in the earth to let it mature with time. TSUJIMURA is intimately in touch with the earth and natural processes and incorporates chance effects in his creative work. He aims to produce imperfect, unpretentious ceramics that demonstrate the beauty of the ordinary. The first thing you may notice about this tea bowl is its slightly irregular form and the seemingly rough surfaces. This lends the piece a wonderful organic quality. This is in marked contrast with ancient tea bowls, which are generally extremely refined looking objects. The white glazing you see is the result of applying a white slip to the object, a traditional Japanese technique known as kohiki, meaning powdering. In this case, the artist intentionally has not applied it evenly. There are two areas on the front and on the right-hand side of the tea bowl, it's just to the upper right, you may not see it very clearly, where the glaze was purposely laid on more thickly. The craquelure, the pattern of cracks in the surface, is the incidental result of the firing process, as is the brown reddish burnt or scorched section on the upper left of the bowl. Somewhat similar in terms of its aesthetics and functional shape is this stoneware tea bowl by Tsujimura Yui. As in the previous work, the vessel has an asymmetric form. It's clearly a handcrafted object. It appears to me to be slightly off kilter, almost as if it's tilting on its base. Tsujimura is inspired by the example of medieval Japanese unglazed stoneware. His trademark employed here is his use of a natural ash glazing. During the wood firing process, the glaze did its own thing, so to speak, which resulted in the irregular shaped streaks and accretions on the surface of the vessel. The close-up on the left gives you a much better idea of the incredibly varied texture of the surface. The photo's a little bit out of focus because I've blown it up so much, but you can see how roughened and varied that surface is. And then when you look inside the vessel, you find this seemingly liquid pool of green glaze, which appears to me like someone has left tea in the cup. So far, we've been looking at work that has been glazed. The next series of ceramics we'll look at were made without glazing and are a form of pottery known as bizenware, produced around the city of Bizen, the location of one of Japan's oldest pottery producing sites. Bizenware has a unique production process that uses a local reddish brown clay that is fired in wood burning tunnel kilns. The firing process creates randomly generated colors and patterns on the surfaces of the vessel that often gives the pieces a somewhat rustic appearance. In the presence of a piece of bizenware, one is reminded of the earthenware origins of pottery and the powerful effects of fire. This vase-shaped vessel by Yokoyama is an excellent example of the natural forces that come to bear on a piece of bizenware as it spends time in a wood fire kiln. What you're seeing in the center of the work is the original color of the earthenware, surrounded by a halo of scorched clay. It actually looks like something I would cook. The visual effect suggests to me the image of molten lava that's flowed over the surface of the earth. In this piece, again, the shaping shows the distinctive intervention of the ceramic artist's hand By the way, this is a rather large jar measuring some 24 inches high. If you remember the photo I showed you earlier in the presentation of a potter using a tool to shave the sides of a vase, you may be able to imagine how the faceted surfaces of the vessel were created. Although Mori has used the same process of production as Yokoyama, the end result is very different. The piece may look very modern, but in fact, it recalls the appearance of ancient Bizen pottery. Mori's artistic goal is to create work that embodies the Zen aesthetics of simplicity and quiet beauty. And I do think there's a sophisticated elegance about his work. By the way, at the top of the pot, those rivulets of darker brown are again the result of the incidences of firing. Suzuki Osamu, born in 1926, was a pioneer of Japanese sculptural ceramics. This is one of his very late works, a monumental piece measuring some 27 inches in height and 14 inches in width. Suzuki was known for creating irregular, asymmetrical forms featuring smooth surfaces that convey a sense of grace and elegance. Although he entitled the piece Horse, it is purely abstract in concept. Unlike the previous two examples of Bizenware, this work of sculpture displays none of the random effects of firing. The color is uniformly a deep reddish brown throughout. In this case, I want to remind all of us how important it is to see works of art in person. As I hope you can appreciate from these two additional photos of Suzuki's sculpture, it looks very different as one walks around the piece. I particularly like the unexpected little window-like hole just visible in the right-hand image. Firing this large piece must have been very challenging since Bizen clay is highly combustible. I began our tour looking at the works in the exhibition that could, at least in theory, be considered utilitarian, although in fact they were never to be used in that way. We've seen sake cups, tea bowls, vases, and jars. Suzuki's so-called horse is the first piece that we view that is unequivocally a work of sculpture. The ceramic vessel on the screen now is also purely sculptural, created first and foremost as an object of art. The ceramicist of the work, Yamada HIKARU, was a founding member of the avant-garde Sodesha group that I described to you at the beginning of this tour. Yamada rejected functional pottery in favor of art for art's sake. In this vessel, he plays on the viewer's expectation of a functional jar. At first glance, the peak top looks like it could be a lid, or the jar could perhaps be opened by lifting off the top piece from the base. In fact, neither of these actions are possible. The vessel is one solid piece of pottery. His expressive handiwork is evident in the pot's unique design, uneven surfaces, rough edges, mottled coloration, and perhaps above all, in the decorative scattering of glyph-like indentations. Using traditional methods of production, Yamada introduced a new modern aesthetic into 20th century Japanese ceramics. Seto Hiroshi, in the generation of ceramicists following the lead of the Sodesha group, developed his own unique avant-garde style of geometric solid forms, featuring flat surfaces abutting those with silver pinstriped patterning. The artist purposely employs asymmetrical designs in his work to represent the unstable and imperfect nature of life, which according to Japanese culture signifies beauty. These details perhaps will give you a better sense of the luster of the reflective surfaces and the precision of the patterning. A very different aesthetic, I think you'd say, from the bisenware we've just been looking at. The next four works, conveniently grouped together in the gallery, may be best described as monumental ceramic sculptures. The one immediately in the foreground is the work of SUTO SATOSHI, part of the current generation of Japanese ceramic artists. SUTO's tall, slender, vase-like form rises to the height of some 18 inches to form a gradual curvilinear profile. To create this shape, the artist combined prominent folds in the stoneware with subtle striated patterning. From the photographs, it's a little bit hard to appreciate the grooves in the surface. SUTO is known for employing this type of decoration, often using stamps or fabrics to impress designs into the clay surface, thereby enhancing the play of light across the vessel. Now, I must admit, when I first saw this 20-inch tall sculpture in a photograph, I thought it was made from metal. Sugetani's harmoniously balanced tower of interlocking components speaks to the flexibility and strength of clay, in this case stoneware, and the inherent beauty of unglazed, unadorned surfaces. You might be surprised to learn, I certainly was, that according to the artist, the sculpture represents his vision of two people in love, their shadows combined as one. Among the works on display, this one is the most innovative from the standpoint of production processes. Fascinated with the material substance of ceramics, Itabashi invented a new material made by firing and pulverizing clay. He then fired the resulting particles, known as shamot or grog, within a framework of glazes. To be honest with you, I'm not quite sure how that's accomplished. What emerges from this process is a powerful sculptural form supported on a wedge-shaped foot, rising in height to 28 inches. The surface of the work resembles the debris from what appears to me to have been a geological explosion of sorts. Now, believe it or not, Michikawa uses a potter's wheel to produce an initial form out of stoneware clay. He then twists the piece on its axis to transform it into a dynamic spiraling shape. The jagged contours, powerful massing, and deep grooves of the sculpture are intended to call to mind the rugged beauty of the mountainous island in northern Japan where the artist was born. In making this vessel, Uraguchi challenged himself to produce a modern equivalent to the monumental bronze bowl, a symbol of ancient Chinese power. This open work, tower-like vase is made from porcelaneous stoneware that has porcelain-like qualities. It's glazed with crackler celadon and trailing iron glazes. That's the red and the black that you see in the upper right-hand portion of the vessel. What distinguishes his achievement among contemporary clay artists is the sophisticated complexity of the combination of traditional materials with innovative glazing to create a new form of Japanese ceramics. And last but not least is this brilliant blue porcelain orb, which I must admit is one of my favorite works in the show. To produce this perfect orb-shaped sculpture, Kimura fashioned porcelain clay into a hollow bowl ball rather, with a small opening at the top and a slightly larger round base. He ran a blade over the surface numerous times, erasing all traces of his fingers and palms. Now, perhaps when you first saw this work, I know when I saw it in a photograph, I thought it was perhaps a work of blown glass. Kimura is fascinated by the many shades of blue found in the sea and sky in his native country. To that end, he uses only the traditional Japanese aquamarine glaze, which you see in this work. The pure geometric form, translucent reflective surface, and deep, rich color result in a work that exudes a sense of harmony and tranquility. And this is the image that I'd like to leave you with, this image of a very beautiful celestial object. Wishing you all a happy and healthy new year. And I thank you all for your attention. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have, although I am not an expert on Japanese ceramics.
Thank you so much, Perri Lee. That was wonderful. And I'll just echo, I think, some of the things you were mentioning, that all the photographs are absolutely beautiful, but there's just nothing quite like seeing it in person. And I know not everybody who's joining us today is local to Athens, but I'll reiterate again that the exhibition is open and on view through September of this year. And the museum is open to the public Thursday through Sunday. And there's time ticketing available on our website and info about that. So I think that's one thing that I've so enjoyed about the show, is just the variety of textures, of techniques, the colors of the glazes. It's a really beautiful show. So I'm going to open it up to the audience now. If anybody has questions or comments for Perri Lee, you can leave those in the Q&A. I see one question from Janice Simon, who's asked, she says she's seen the show in person and it's fantastic. And she's asking, did you select the works from the larger collection for the exhibition?
No, I did not. And I'm glad you asked that question. I did want to mention that there are no works by female ceramicists, and I don't think that was done for any intentional reason. So don't read anything into that. But I thought it was important to give a shout out to the women ceramicists working in Japan who are so talented. The Horvitzes, as you said, have an enormous collection. And for those of you who are interested, since they have lent it to a variety of places, there's a number of reproductions or images available on the internet. So I encourage you to go look.
Any other questions or comments for Perri Lee before we wrap up? See, Jean Petrovs, who's one of our docents here at the museum, is asking, do the Horvitzes collect other kinds of Japanese art? Do you know?
Not that I know of, no.
And then Bill Island, director of the museum, is asking,
sure to be a hard one then.
if you would elaborate on the sculptural qualities of the works.
Well, I think that's probably the hardest to get across when we're looking at them on the screen, but they are all meant to be seen in the round, and ideally also to be handled, although you can't handle them in the museum. I think what's particularly striking about the works that were chosen for the show is that they are monumental. Yes, some of them are very, very small, the traditional sake cups and some of the jars, but most of them are very, very large pieces. And so they do take on that notion of a work of sculpture rather than a pot and what that connotes.
Mm-hmm.
I look at them as most of them are works of sculpture.
Yeah, and I think that's something that really you get that sense when seeing the work in person, particularly the way they're installed in that gallery.
Yes.
Like they're beautifully lit, and you can walk all the way around most of the works to get to kind of get that
Mm-hmm.
sense of the full I guess
I mean, that's the beauty of most, I mean, there are some ceramic reliefs, but that's the beauty of ceramics, that they are three-dimensional, and there's something very special about a three-dimensional work, even though I generally work on two-dimensional flat works. As I said, I can imagine going into the gallery and wanting to pick up some of those pieces, the smaller ones at least, and handle them and to feel the surfaces, because they are so varied.
And then Janice says that she did see the Horvitz's larger collection at the Asia Museum, and that it was amazing. And then one of your friends is, I'm not sure which, is asking, did you do the curation and the installation remotely? And have you been able to see the exhibit since it's been installed?
I broke the cardinal rule of art historians. I have not seen the pieces in person because, unfortunately, COVID hit and I couldn't travel. No, I've not had the luxury. I'm hoping, since I've gotten the first shot, that I get the second shot and I may be able to head to Athens very soon and see the exhibition and see my friends. But so the curation was, as I said, the pieces were chosen by Mrs. Horvitz, and then I was let loose to do the research, and I learned an awful lot about Japanese ceramics. I've always loved them, but I'd like to think them a little bit more educated. But the number of artists who are involved in the ceramic scene in Japan are just enormous. And they're all very, very talented and very, very varied.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back about that kind of timeline, because this show opened in September. So thinking back to when you were working on it was when COVID really hit and wasn't, you know. So hopefully brighter days ahead and you'll be able to come see it in person here in Athens before it closes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. If you have any further questions for Perri Lee or for anyone at the museum, you're welcome to email me, and you're going to get a follow-up survey in your email after the program's over, so you'll know how to reach out if you need to. But thanks so much for joining us today. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Perri Lee.
Thank you. Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Take care.